So here's the thing. In my humble opinion, most of the people that are angry at Emma Grede's advice and at the book in particular, Start With Yourself, haven't even read the book. They haven't read the book and they haven't properly listened to her comments in context, for example, in her podcast or in her interviews. And how I saw this play out recently and why I wanted to do this video in particular. I was watching a video of somebody on social media, somebody that I had followed for a while, and they started doing a video basically attacking some of the headlines that have come out around the book. And the way that they started the video was, I don't even know who this Emma Grede person is, but X, Y, 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 Z. And I'm like, so that says it to me already. Like, you don't know who she is, you don't know where she's come from, and that in itself isn't necessarily an issue. But the way that this person then went on about how bad the advice was, given that she actually hadn't really read the advice in context to understand where it was coming from, it just really annoyed me. And I see that a lot. And interestingly, in this last week or so, as I'm recording this, Emma Grede has had Gary Vaynerchuk on her podcast. And interestingly, Gary Vaynerchuk said something quite similar to her in terms of one of the pieces of her advice. I don't see him getting dragged on the internet. And this has happened before, and it's something she talks about actually. There are various positions that she takes and things that she says where, she's had other founders, other well-known, we're sort of like talking top of the tree individuals that have said the same thing, and they don't seem to get the backlash. And yet Emma Grede says it, and everybody, is all over it like a rash. There is a theory, actually. There's another book behind me. I won't reach behind to get it. But there's another book behind me called The Authority Gap. And I tell you what, some of what is happening to Emma Grede is the authority gap. And if you want to understand it, you need to read that book by Marianne Segar. It talks about how women are often deemed to have less authority when they speak. And that's why on the internet, you have a lot of people telling women to shut up, shut their mouths, right? Because we assume, and this is women and men, it's people of all genders, we all assume that women do not have as much authority, or at least that's our social conditioning. Obviously, some of us then rewire, but our natural social conditioning, at least in the West, so particularly in the US and UK, is to assume that women have less authority and less credibility when they speak. And I'm convinced that that is probably why Emma Grede gets a lot of the backlash that she does, as well as the fact that she's a successful entrepreneur, right? We know there is research around likability of women that are successful and the challenge of being a success and also being likable, right? So there's all of that behind it. So yeah, for me, I'm kind of like, I'm really fed up of these people that are criticizing what she says. So I'm going to go through what are some of the things that she says. So if you haven't read it, that's fine. No judgment. I'm going to tell you some of the things that she says. I have listened to the audiobook and I've watched quite a few of her podcasts. I haven't listened to all of them, but I've watched quite a few, and so I've heard her tell her story quite a lot on various podcasts and interviews. So I think that means that I understand a fair bit of the context in terms of where she's coming from, at least what she shares publicly anyway. So if you don't know, Emma Grede, CEO, co-founder of Skims. Good American, and then she also works in the Skims brand as well with the Kardashians. I do think that association with the Kardashians also is part of the issue, and probably the fact also that she's multiracial but potentially identifies a little bit more as black, and there's all kinds of things that are wrapped up in why she gets attacked by individuals of all races and all genders, right? It's quite complex. In fact, it's very intersectional. So her identity is very intersectional. And I actually believe that what we're seeing is there is an element of, and she sort of says this, there is an element actually of pretty privilege, and she talks about this. So undoubtedly, she will have gone into spaces where, because she's an attractive woman, she's quite slim, etc., all of those things, she will have pretty privilege, and she talks about that. I think there are actually some influencers and content creators that have like attacked her because she is, because she has this pretty privilege, and they've almost sort of said, you've gotten to where you are because you are this, because you're married to a man who is Swedish, because you're married to somebody from a rich family. It didn't even come from like rich background. It's totally crazy, but there are a lot of assumptions that are wrapped up in her race and her identity and her gender and all of those sorts of things that have then been conflated with the advice that she actually gives. Gosh, I feel like I'm doing a lot of defending. I wasn't expecting to go off into a rant to defend Emma Grede in terms of her identity. But let's get into what it is that she actually says, because this is the bit where if you disagree, then fine, like let's have a conversation about it. So I'm going to give my view. If you disagree, please put your views in the comments respectfully. Just be respectful, right? If you disagree, because we can disagree about that, but why do we have to bring into it like her identity, her gender, who she's married to, whether she's associated with the Kardashians, this, that, and the other? Okay, so working from home, my favourite topic, working from home and the damage that it can do specifically to women's careers. This is what she said. She's kind of almost like said, that it's almost as though women have kind of like sleepwalking into, oh, it's great having this flexibility of, I can just put a bit of laundry on while I'm at home, or I can be there to pick the kids up, or this, that, and the other. The reality is, and she's not the first person to say this, because a lot of people have spoken about the importance of the partner that you pick. Even Gary Vaynerchuk said this the other day on her podcast, the importance of the partner that you pick in life. Was it Gary Vaynerchuk? I think it was anyway. It was somebody. It was some male entrepreneur. But anyway, here's the thing. Was it Gary Vaynerchuk or was it on the Diary of a CEO? It may have been actually on the Diary of a CEO. Maybe I'm confusing two podcasts. It was Alex Hormozi. There you go. Alex Hormozi was actually saying it, the importance of the partner that you pick to your entrepreneurial journey. So when it comes to hetero relationships, here's the thing. And Sheryl Sandberg talks about this in Lean In, the importance of partners, because in hetero relationships, there is a real risk, right? And it's not everybody, but there's a real risk. The majority of women in hetero relationships end up doing the majority of the childcare, the house care, all of that, all of the domestic stuff on top of their day job, even if both work. So even if both work, even if the woman has got a high-flying job, the woman still ends up in a hetero relationship. The woman still ends up doing a lot of the housework. And so what Emma Grede is basically saying is, you got to be careful as a woman when you're like, okay, I'm just going to work a few days from home so that I can do more of that stuff. Well, cool. But what impact is that having on your career trajectory? The reality is, if you're specifically wanting to be at home so that you can do more stuff at home, the chances are actually you probably haven't got the right partner or the right setup that is supporting you to also propel in your career. And then you are being disadvantaged because you're not visible. Let's not pretend that it doesn't matter if you're visible or not in the office in terms of your ability to build relationships with people, your ability to network with people. I've just been watching this morning a video of Grace Andrews, who used to work at the Diary of a CEO, at the Cannes Lions Festival, which is a festival for like media and advertising and brands and creators. And the word that she talks about is access, proximity to individuals, but you got to be there. Like, I don't know why we're all pretending that, you can just do everything remotely and it will not have any impact on outcomes. It's just, we're like literally living in la la land. And basically Emma Grede is just calling that out and is saying, if you want your career to go far, and that's the thing, she is talking about, women, for example, that do want to go further in their career. If actually you've made a sort of eyes wide open decision that you're happy where you are, for whatever reason, you don't want to climb the ladder right now, then absolutely, if you want to work from home, 5 days a week, do that. Like, knock yourself out. Do you know what I mean? But what she's saying is, if you do want to get ahead, then you need to get yourself in the office, right? It's just the reality of it. And she's also talking about that from her own perspective as well. And I think this is something that's quite important. She's not pretending that she's a researcher. She's not, sort of like offering up loads of data or science behind this. She's basically saying, based on my own experience and the businesses that I've observed and the people that I've worked with, etc., this is what happens. She actually gives a really interesting example of proximity, which leads into my next point, which is around, particularly for early careers individuals, learning by osmosis, or when you're new into an organization, learning by osmosis, learning by overhearing. Gary Vaynerchuk definitely said this in his interview with Emma Grede the other day. And the term he used was learning by osmosis. And I've been using that a lot lately, because Emma Grede gives this specific example of earlier in her career when she chose to sit opposite the boss. And some of her colleagues were like, why would you want to do that? And they're sort of like busy online shopping on their laptops because the boss can't see what they're doing. Meanwhile, Emma Grede is literally listening into every conversation that her boss is having, including, for example, sales calls. And she said what she used to do is literally write down what her boss had said, maybe just tweak it a little bit and then use it herself in the next call. And that's how she was actually able to get ahead and progress, by literally learning and hearing. You can't do that if you're working from home, right? That is the reality, and that is why it's so important. But also the relationship building. I mean, it's the CEO of Zoom. The CEO of Zoom said it's hard to build trusting relationships over Zoom. The CEO of Zoom said that. So if you don't believe me, believe the CEO of Zoom, right? So those are some of the things. One of the other things as well, actually, there's another point where she gets a little bit of criticism, was this thing. In fact, I had it quoted to me the other day when I was getting my nails done. And the thing that people quote is like, oh, she only spends 3 hours with her kids. And that's it, no context, is that per day? Is that per week? What is that? No context to it. And it's been widely misquoted by people that haven't read the context, don't know what setting is. I mean, here's the reality, and Emma Grede talks about this. Obviously, she has a lot of help in her life. In fact, I caught a glimpse of a particular video, which was more of like a vlog style of hers. I don't even know what it was for, but I think she was promoting the book, actually, probably. But at one point, I think one of the nannies was kind of like, they were getting in the car, and one of the nannies was kind of like hiding, and she was like, you don't need to hide. They know that I've got nannies. Like, she's so open with that, right? She's completely open with it. And so, she's very open with, this is the amount of time in my day that I spend with my kids, and this is the amount of time I spend at work. The thing that I would say, I think people would be surprised that she talks very much in her business about being open to flexibility and the fact that people in her business do work flexibly. So just because she has these views of, how to operate when you're trying to get ahead or trying to climb, that doesn't mean that she feels that everybody needs to work like that. She's just basically, holding up a mirror to some of the assumptions about how you can work and whether you can still sort of progress working within those comfort zones. So the other thing about the time spent with her kids, I think that what's quite useful, if you've heard her talk about her own story, and she actually goes into a lot of detail about this in the book, which I found really interesting and also really inspiring. She had quite a tough upbringing. I think a lot of people know that if you've heard her talk about her own life. Very tough upbringing. Single parent family. Mom was going out to work. From a very, very young age, she basically had to look after her two sisters. As she describes it, she's kind of like, my mom was like the dad that was like going out and getting a wage, and then I was like the mom, like, making sure that my younger sisters were off out the door, out to school, etc. And I think that probably has framed her lens of what children need and what they don't need. So she probably has a view that children are a lot more resilient than we think. And I think there probably is some truth to that. Now, am I going to say that therefore works in every scenario? I'm not. Because, kids are different, right? And so, I think it's totally up to you, but I would probably say you want to take that with a pinch of salt and bear in mind that is coming from her own perspective in terms of what she's seen. And she's kind of like, kids are more resilient than we think. We shouldn't be wrapping them up in cotton wool. And some of that I agree to a certain extent, but I just think it's coming from her own perspective. And I think once you understand that, and the fact that, she probably had far less than that in terms of time with her own mum, then I think you kind of get where she's coming from. But I would sort of say it's one of those where maybe you sort of like take it with a pinch of salt. The other thing I want to talk about, so I've already talked about the fact that she isn't a researcher. There is online, on the back of like some of these things that she was saying about, get in the office if you want to get ahead, and taking agency, etc. I'm aware that some of the backlash online, because I did a LinkedIn Live with somebody who enlightened me to what was on Instagram and TikTok, and some people were saying that advice isn't for you. They're almost like, if you don't get it, if you don't buy into that advice, the advice isn't for you. As in, okay, you're not ambitious, so it's not for you, so don't bother. And I think that's a little bit savage, if I'm going to be honest. It's a little bit savage because, as I say, I think that these bits of advice, even though I've got quite strong views about some of them, so for example, the working from home, the impact on early careers, etc., we can still have a debate and discuss about them, right? We don't have to be disparaging to anybody just because they sort of say, I don't agree with that. Because otherwise I would be just the same as the ones that are being disparaging without having read the context, right? So we can we can disagree and we can discuss. And please, if you disagree, please put it in the comments. But let's be really thoughtful. Let's really think it through. Let's go and kind of like get the context. So if you do disagree, please tell me that you've read the book or you've listened to her interviews, etc. And so you understand the full context of the point and why you disagree. Interestingly, I actually did a LinkedIn Live this morning because it's Friday morning as I record this. And most people know I go live on LinkedIn every Friday. And I was talking to somebody and she was in the office and I said, "Oh, you going to the office on a Friday?" And she said, "Yeah, our office is pretty much Monday to Friday. We're all in every day." And I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting. And it's really nice." And I then went into my TED talk about, why it's so important to be in the office. And she said there are good things about it. But she said, since the pandemic, actually, a lot of my team isn't physically in the same location. So although the sentiment is nice, just for those practical reasons, it just doesn't always work. And so it made me think actually, that's actually where this advice might just fall down a little bit, right? Because post-pandemic, a lot of businesses started structuring very differently. So teams were probably more multi-location, more remote physically. People started being hired that lived all over the place. So as much as there is that benefit of physically being together, because we saw the flexibility and the ability to work remotely, it probably means that we have actually got more teams that just getting together actually is harder, because of those actual constraints in terms of proximity. So that is it. Please let me know what you think. I'd love to know what your take is on the book. I'd love to know what you think about some of the criticism of Emma Grede. Do you think it's warranted? Do you think that she probably just shouldn't run her mouth and should maybe like get into the science of it? Right. So that's it. What is my rapid review? What do I think about rating out of 5? It's a good one. I'd probably say a 4 out of 5. Do you know what? And this is one of the few that doesn't get a 5 out of 5 right from me. So here's my thing. The reason I bought that book wasn't just to like get the full context. It's actually because I'm helping a client with a mentoring program. And I thought that book, I thought I might want to recommend that as a resource to individuals that want to be mentored. And so I thought, well, I'll buy the book, but I also want to listen to the audiobook just to make sure I'm happy to recommend it. And so the only reason I give it a 4 and not a 5 is generally when I choose non-fiction that I want to be able to follow and implement, I've tried to sway, especially I would say like in the last 4 or 5 years, I try to generally sway towards either biography, which I guess it is quite sort of like biographical, or when it's non-fiction and it's like giving advice, saying this is the way something should be done, I like for there to be a little bit of science and research behind it. So do you know what would have been nice actually with this book? Is if her editors had been able to get hold of a little bit of science and research. I think that actually would have definitely made the book a 5 out of 5, and she probably wouldn't have gotten as much heat over it as well. I mean, she probably would have, let's be honest about it. So that is it. So that's my rating out of 5, 4 out of 5. My one-line verdict, it's definitely worth a read. It's very inspiring, and she's an incredibly successful woman. I'm actually, I wouldn't say I'm like a massive fan, but I really like what she does. I like the energy that she's putting out in the world. Who should read it? Definitely a book for working women. Working women, if you're ambitious, and this is I don't want to sound like that it's not for you, but if you're ambitious, this is the book for you. Who shouldn't read it? It's not really for men. I mean, obviously men can read it and get something from it, but it is definitely written more for women. Audiobook, physical book, or both. To be honest, I mean, I tell you what's nice about the physical book. It's one of those, I don't know how to describe it, but you know when it's like a fabric feel kind of cover? As a hardback, anyway, I bought the hardback. So it's actually, what's the word? You know, in terms of tactile, how tactile it is, the kind of feeling bit. It's very nice. But I loved it as the audiobook because I quite like her voice, and I like that she's kind of stuck with her South London accent with a little bit of a US drawl at times. And that's it. So please let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really keen to hear on this one. So that is my take. Let me know yours.